1990s are known as one of the most revolutionary eras in the history of animation. A time where they went from a sideshow, a gimmick, something for the kiddies, and evolved into something more story-based, deeper characters, bombastic songs, just oozing epicness. We saw the Disney Renaissance hit full swing and release films that would go on to define a whole generation. We saw the birth of Pixar and their super franchise Toy Story, something that's still going strong with no signs of slowing down. We saw the birth of DreamWorks and various other studios try their hand in the animation business to varying results. We'd see true underrated masterpieces like the Iron Giant come out, and all the while Japanese studios like Ghibli were releasing stuff that was so far ahead of what you think animation could be, further inspiring future filmmakers with their work. All in all, it was a damn good decade for animation. One that probably wouldn't be equaled again until the 2010s, when it felt like all the studios were once again firing on all cylinders, and the industry became more lucrative than it had ever been. But one of the big elements of the Disney Renaissance that people seem to point to as a game changer is the way in which they pivoted their stories to improve their princess characters. Historically, these characters were pretty much nothing burgers. They were bland, no personality, generic in every way. And even by the 1950s, people had grown very tired of them. Hence why Sleeping Beauty was the last of the old school golden era princess films. Like legit, at the time, reviewers and audiences, they were put off by how she does nothing and has next to no personality or narrative purpose, beyond being a reward. And so it became clear that Disney princesses, they were no longer the draw they'd been before. And if people in the 50s think you are not woke enough, then it must be really bad. Jeez. So when those films came back around like 40 years later, it was clear that something needed to change to make them more palatable, a bit more accessible and acceptable to the modern audience, the modern taste. And one of the big ways that this occurred was with the restructuring of the role of the Disney princess, or really just women in animation in general. The Renaissance is frequently looked back on as the start of a major shift in this regard. And then the revival era of the 2010s, that really brought it to the next level, with them again revolutionizing things, often making the heroine the overall hero, sometimes cutting out the romantic elements altogether, or blending them better with the heroic role. But yeah, for many, it's the Renaissance era that changed things for the better, and Disney led that charge. In particular, I think you can point to films like Mulan as the pinnacle of that ideal in the 90s. I'd argue that's the one that's most forward-thinking and progressive with her role as the hero. She saves the day, she earns her place, she's not a bystander, she's not a reward or a set dressing, she's the hero of the story, and she gets the guy. He doesn't get her, she gets him. But the thing is, that film actually came out almost at the very end of the Renaissance era, towards the end of it all in 1998. A lot of the other films that came before, they did take great strides, but I don't think they were quite there yet, and they do get viewed a bit with rose-tinted goggles. They were a big step forward, don't get me wrong, but they still fell into a lot of those old tropes, and they hadn't yet perfected that formula. And yet they still get massive recognition as those building blocks, those stepping stones, the founding fathers, so to speak. But today I want to throw another hat in the ring. I want to talk about Anastasia, and how in my eyes it's one of the most important and forward-thinking of the crop of 90s princess flicks, but doesn't get the recognition it deserves because it wasn't made by one of the big studios. So yeah, Anastasia was released in 1997 by Fox Animated Studios. And if you have no idea what other films that studio made, don't worry. No one else does either. They only made 3. They made this, an actually good direct-to-video Bartok prequel spin-off. I mean, it didn't need to be made, but it was still very good. And then Titan AE, which bombed hard and killed the studio completely. They'd also planned in the future to make Ice Age, which eventually shifted to another Fox property, Blue Sky Studios, and Over the Hedge, which eventually went over to DreamWorks. So Anastasia was pretty much its only film of much note or success. But even then, its success pales in comparison to many others of its era. It had a budget of $53 million and grossed $140 million, and that's not bad, especially for an unproven studio on their first film in what was, at the time, a massively oversaturated market of animated studios releasing theatrical films. But it does pale in comparison to some of the other box office numbers that we're seeing for Disney, for Pixar, even DreamWorks. Even the rookie studio was making a lot of strides. And even though the reception for the film was massively positive, with the only major complaints being from complainers about its historical accuracy, which, side note, I do understand those issues. To say that they take artistic liberties, it's putting it lightly, to say the least. There's a lot of whitewashing of certain figures, e.g. the Tsar of Russia, and almost extreme demonizing of others, i.e. Rasputin, painting him as the reason the Bolsheviks overthrew the royal family and ushered in an age of communism, as opposed to the fact that, the royal family were very terrible. Not that they deserve to get massacred or anything like that, but, it very much just paints over that. But even with those inaccuracies, the film is just really good. It's just so fun. And like I said, it's one of the best early examples of that important shift, to the point that I think it's almost on the level of Mulan in how progressive I think it really is in terms of Anastasia's role, her interactions with Dmitri, and just all of that. And I'd go far as to say that this is the film that feels more like a forerunner or a prototype to the films of the 2010s. More than even a lot of the actual earlier Renaissance films that people hold up as those prototypes. And I think a big part of that is simply how Anastasia is framed within the film. She is clearly the protagonist of the story. And I mean, this was obvious considering she's front and center on the poster and that she's the title character, but I think the real difference between having her and the others that came before is that she's not only the protagonist, e.g. the title character, but she's the hero. She's the person who comes to the rescue and saves the day. And on top of that, she's the one who pushes the story forward and creates change. And I think to illustrate my point, we got to walk through the plot a little bit to point out some key things. Okay, so the film starts with a bit of a prologue. It's simply there to explain the context of the movie, sets up the close bond between the Dowager Empress and Anastasia, sets up who Dmitri is, and that Rasputin's our main villain, who's responsible for everything that's gone wrong in the royal family through the use of a curse. The family dies, Dmitri saves Maria and Anastasia, Anastasia gets lost, she hits her head, loses her memory, and we cut to the present. Well, not the present, but 10 years later. You know what I mean. And yeah, in that early section, she was a bystander. But she's a little girl, doesn't really matter too much. It's all about that setup. And that's where she really starts to take a front seat in the narrative. After she's left the orphanage she'd been growing up in, she meets Dmitri and Vlad, two con men trying to escape Russia, and deliver Anastasia to her grandmother in Paris in exchange for a massive reward. Of course, they think it's a scam, but Anastasia, whom they know as Anya, is actually legit. Anyway, she quickly establishes herself as a force to be reckoned with within their little trio. But there isn't much opportunity to showcase herself until about 30 minutes into the film, when Rasputin sends his little gargoyle spirit things to attack and derail the train to try to kill Anastasia. Having disconnected their carriages alongside the engine, the train's continuing to speed faster and faster out of control, and their carriage is fused to the engine so they can't disconnect, and they're going to die. And here is where Anya enters hero mode. Whilst Dmitri's struggling in vain and Vlad's panicking, Anya is the one who finds the dynamite, and she lights it, freeing them from the speeding engine. And at the same time, she aids Dmitri in throwing down the chain to slow their progress towards the broken bridge, and she is the one who encourages them all to jump off the train into the snowbank to save themselves from a grisly death. Big time hero energy. Not just the main character, but the brave character. The character that gets up and does things, whilst Dumb and Dumber were just sort of there. Yeah, she ends up getting saved by Dmitri later on when she's sleepwalking on the boat, but I don't think that's enough to make her a blushing damsel in distress and undo all that good work. She's still an active member of the team. It blends who the main hero is throughout the film. And on top of that, it's just, in general, hard to contend with magic that can control you through your dreams, so, Anyway, but quite crucially, she is once again the one that saves the day, who defeats Rasputin in the end, in a ballroom gown as well. She manages to save herself from death and destroy his, oh god, how do you say this word? Reliquary? I'm honestly too lazy to look it up. And while she's doing that, Dmitri, what's he doing? Trying to save her, but not really, because he's getting beaten up by a stone Pegasus statue that had been brought to life. And so, in the climax of everything, it's Anastasia who's showcased and spotlighted above all else. Spotlighted in a way that few princess films do. Mulan and the later ones, yes, they do showcase their heroines. They make them feel like a big deal, often making them feel just as big or even bigger than the male counterpart in the film. But I'd argue this is not something we'd really seen before that. Maybe in Pocahontas, I guess. But, I don't really like that movie, so tough. But let's move on. I also felt like it was very impressive that they balanced things. They have the heroine side of things, the free spirit, the adventurer, but they balance it up with romance. Like, the romance, it doesn't become her whole personality, her whole drive. It doesn't consume her arc and character. She doesn't spend the entire film, once she's met him, shooting doe eyes at Dmitri. They keep growing closer as the story progresses, of course, but she still retains her initial goals, the ones she'd started off her journey with. That desire to go to Paris, desire to find her family, and to try to figure out where in the world she belongs. She doesn't become his reward for changing. And in some ways, it kind of feels like he is her reward, in a way. Because instead of the damsel in distress, this dude is the hunk in distress in the end. And on top of that, it doesn't feel like his character goes through everything he did just to get that happy ending with her, which is kind of the formula for many Disney dudes that have come before and since. Instead, he changes his heart and he ends up doing the right thing, mostly because he thinks it's the right thing. He doesn't try to get with her, he tries to leave. And I find that more romantic and more progressive, and also just much less icky, or completely less icky. Hey, since I saved your life, should I start booking things for the wedding, or... Like, no, don't do that. So yeah, for me, that was a pretty big shift in the dynamic between your male and your female protagonist. We had the male romantic lead expecting nothing from the female lead, and I just think it was very refreshing, well written, and progressive, way ahead of its time. And you know what else was a massive change? A massive shift from what we've seen come before and since? The ending. In the end, what does she do? Yeah, she chooses love. She chooses happiness. She chooses adventure, but she also chooses to be skint, dirt poor. When in these sort of films do they not have the glorious happy ending where they end up with everything? The wealth, the prestige, the fame, as well as love. Snow White, she goes to live in a palace, become a queen. Same with Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin. In Pocahontas, they do separate at the end, but she's still the daughter of the leader of their nation, and he's some rich dude from England. Mulan becomes an important and revered figure. She already came from money. She's going back to money. And now she has Captain Shang, who is a prominent member of the army, as her romantic interest. Like, come on. When have they ever gone back to being paupers at the end of the story in any princess film? I don't know. I just feel like this is such a refreshing take on things, a refreshing ending, that you don't need a big grand fairy tale to be happy or have a happy ending. That money and land and prominence, it doesn't buy you happiness. And in the end, your happiness can be found anywhere. Although, I personally would want the castle and whatnot. Just saying. I hope they snatched that check for 10 million rubles or whatever it was. Gotta start somewhere. But yeah, screw the historical inaccuracy. This movie slaps. And I will forever be loud and proud about how this film is the true game changer of the 90s. And I honestly think that you can see its influence felt throughout films of the 2010s and the 2020s, even if it will never be acknowledged as such. And so, yeah, with all that being said, these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of my thoughts on Anastasia? Are you with me? Maybe not. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.